Well, good morning, everyone. Thomas Montgomery here. We get together with our distribution partners most weekday mornings at this time, 8 o'clock Central. Talk about strategies, tips, techniques, share success stories, and talk about next steps. Today's training is really more of a packaging. So it's not something new that you need to learn or do differently, but it's one way to package. So let me describe the business in a box concept, and then we'll come back and have an interactive discussion on ideas that we might be able to use this. But let's discuss the topic first. So as should be shared on the screen here, our topic is business in a box. We start with just a little background. What we know is that our small business consultants are crucial cogs in the wheel, helping us connect with small businesses that want to need capital. It's a very attractive role. Of course, people don't pay up front to be a small business consultant, so it's not a buy-in relationship, and it's very lucrative. We've talked in other trainings about the income that our small business consultants can make on a full or a part-time basis. Today, we're going to talk about the business in a box approach, which is really oriented towards our state directors. So if you're not a state director, you're fine to listen to today's training. Maybe you've considered becoming a state director, maybe not. But if you are a current state director, I think you might find that this is a very effective way to build a large team of consultants, right? Because we have this hierarchy. On top are our state directors, and underneath the state directors, we have small business consultants. So this is an approach, a model whereby we've seen a couple of our state directors use this and very, very rapidly build out a team of small business consultants. So sometimes it's the packaging, how it's presented. So as mentioned here and highlighted yellow, the first thing to consider is if you're a state director, we know that you want to have small business consultants on your team, right? Because we need them to go help the clients, and you're making an override. So that's obvious. But part of the planning has to include what's your game plan for developing small business consultants. And several of you have said, okay, I want to have several state directors have said, all right, I want to have a small business consultant in each zip code in their state to have good geographic accessibility. So you could Google and look up how many zip codes are in your state, and then that would tell you how many slots we need to fill. Now, I know that some zip codes are more populous than others, some are more remote than others, some are just frankly more desirable than others. But regardless, that's a pretty good approach for our state directors. Just create a spreadsheet of every zip code in your state, and either there's a name next to it, which means you filled the opening, or there is an opening, and so we need to fill it. The concept that several of you who are using this one small business consultant per zip code in their state is using is kind of a boots on the ground type of approach. The analogy that Alfred used when he introduced this idea to me is it's kind of like Edward Jones. So Edward Jones, of course, is a different business model, but they have local offices and communities across the country. I can tell you here in our zip code, 75773, which I guess it's not on our footer here, but that's where our office is. In just our zip code, there are actually 3 Edward Jones offices. So Edward Jones has successfully built a boots on the ground distribution system that we're seeking to replicate, even though what we offer is different than what they offer. And so Edward Jones is now, as I understand, at about 15,000 offices. So, we certainly want to get above 10,000 small business consultants across the country. Your decision as a state director is how many of those do you want to be under your hierarchy? Because you're literally paid overrides on every consultant that's on your team. The note here before we dig into the business on a box concept is, as a state director, again, you choose how many consultants you want on your team. When you signed up as a state director, you'll notice that there was no performance measurements, no requirements. So maybe you want to be small and stay small and be a niche player. But the weakness with that is, let's say that you take North Dakota. We have an opening in North Dakota. So let's say that you wanted to become the state director in North Dakota. And you say, well, I want to keep it simple. I only want 2 consultants to manage because it's simple. That'll bring the state director around $14,000 a month. And if the state director is fine with only about $14,000 a month, maybe the state director doesn't want to work any harder. Well, I guess that's okay for the state director. And I guess that's okay for the 2 small business consultants. But for the people that live in that state, it's not very accessible. So even though we can conduct business online anywhere in the country, part of what we want to talk about today is being visible in the community, having small business consultants in each community that's interfacing with the chamber, with faith-based leaders and so forth. So if I were you, if I were a state director like yourself, I would encourage you to consider this model and set it as a goal. So will we automatically get a small business consultant in every zip code? Of course not. It can take some time, but we could start there. But the note here is simply, if you're a state director, you're in charge. You're running your state. If you want a few consultants or a lot of consultants, it's up to you. But it's a mathematical formula, right? So if we can get consultants on board, they're making money, you're making about $7,000 of overrides off of each one. So obviously, the more consultants you have, the more your income will grow. So this is piggybacking off some of the other training we've had. Now we're going to pivot over into the exact topic for today, which is the concept of a business in a box. And again, I want to thank Alfred for really being the lead on this, but others of you have been involved with flushing through this model. Alfred's unusually not on training today. Otherwise, I'd ask him to speak. Normally he's on, but he's not here today. Okay, so business in a box concept for small business consultants. So we always want to start with understanding the role. So state directors are the leaders. Small business consultants are not salespeople, but they conduct the assessments of small businesses to determine if they're capital ready. Well, why is this important? Well, you and I know there are a lot of small businesses out there. There's millions and millions and millions of small businesses. Now, do many of them, to most of them, want or need more capital? Absolutely. Well, are there banks and credit unions and alternative lenders all over the internet? There sure are. So you might say, well, what's the problem? If there's a bunch of small businesses and there's a bunch of lending sources, hey, there's no problem to fix. Because what you and I know as entrepreneurs, we generate our wealth by solving problems. Well, here's the problem. Most small businesses are not capital ready. They may want money, they may need money, but they're not capital ready. I was just talking to Henry right before our call this morning. Henry had to let me go. Henry is a small business owner. He just signed up yesterday, which is great. And he's looking for $1 million. And that's fine. So that's a lofty goal. We'll create a plan and we'll get there. But Henry had to let me go this morning because his cousin was coming to pick him up because Henry doesn't have a car. He needed a ride to the food bank, right? So there's often a disconnect. I'm not making light of Henry's situation. He's a smart guy and he'll be successful and I'm sure he'll get his $1 million. But the point is, there's often a disconnect. People that'll say, yeah, I want money. I need money, but they're not capital ready. And so they're not going to get funding until they're capital ready, till they're credible on paper. That's what you and I do. So as small business consultants, the very first thing that we do is we conduct a systematic assessment. So in this case, we need to let Henry know where he's at. So Henry, great, you want $1 million. We'll work with you to get there, not a problem. But let's start with a realistic assessment of where you're at. And so our small business consultants follow a checklist. It's a 6-question checklist to objectively and transparently evaluate the small business. So that's the primary role of the small business consultant. Two things are happening at once. Number one, we're building the financial literacy of the entrepreneurs like Henry. So he's not falsely expecting $1 million to drop in his lap tomorrow because he's in such a destitute position today. He needs a ride to the food bank. It's not just that he needs to go to the food bank. He needs a ride to get to the food bank. So we'll get him from where he is to where he is now to where he needs to be, but he is not capital ready. So the assessment helps us build financial literacy about what it means to be capital ready, and is the individual client capital ready or not. If they are, great. We move them immediately into funding. We have our access to capital program that would be on the home page of each of your replicated sites. Cost the client nothing to enroll, no upfront cost. Guaranteed capital raise of a minimum of 100,000. No minimum credit scores, no minimum time in business to enroll. So small business consultants create a systematic assessment, see if the client's capital ready. One of two things. If they are, we go to funding. If not, we fix it. Okay, so we needed to start with that role. Now we're going to get into the business in a box. So let's again assume that you are a state director. That's really our audience of our conversation today. So if you are a state director, we need to go find consultants that can do these evaluations, assessments, to help clients determine if they're capital ready. If they are, we get them funded. They get money, you get paid. If they're not, we fix them so they can get funding and you get paid. So you get paid either way. You don't care, and I say this respectfully, you don't care if they're ready for funding or if they're not ready for funding. Truth is truth. We need to gather the data. You get paid either way, right? You're paid either way. So if you're a state director, you may want to consider, as Alfred is doing and a few others of you, approaching prospective small business consultants in this business in a box model. I've got a question. Timothy is not a state director. He's a small business consultant. He's wanting to know if he can plug into the business in a box. The answer is yes. So any small business consultant can be a participant in this model. Our primary point today is how state directors can use this model to fill the openings in their zip codes. But let's continue. So the business in a box model is the concept that we bring on small business consultants, obviously for all the benefits and reasons we've talked about, but we provide them a minimum of 100,000 so they can build an environment to reach their potential. Well, what does that mean? There's three primary bullets that we address with business in a box. So let's address those now. So if you're a state director, let's take Holly. I believe Holly is one of our newest state directors. She needs to create a presentation, and not literally, but she needs to convey to prospective small business consultants why they would want to become a consultant. And so primarily, she would drive people to the career page on her replicated website. It describes the value proposition, has a link to the training. But this is something else, for example, that Holly could use. She could say, well, look, I'm looking for a small business consultant in zip code 12345. Doesn't cost you anything to enroll. It's a great way to help people, no selling involved, and create a great income. One of the incentives we have is called a business in a box. And so now we go through what is included in business in a box. The first thing that most likely our state directors would prefer that their consultants be is be visible in their community. Do they have to be? No. Could they just work out of their back bedroom in the dark in their pajamas? Of course, if they want. But in a perfect world, so it's not required, but in a perfect world, the small business consultants will be visible in their community. Well, we want to support that if that's something that they want to do. And that's why we're willing to get them the $100,000 to do the following. So first of all, it would, in a perfect world, so it's like good, better, best. Is this required? No. Is it best? Yes. In the best case scenario, not required, the small business consultant would either lease or buy an office. So they would have a physical presence, a flag in the sand in their zip code. If you're following this model, again, we're not saying this is a required model, just a best practice. So we want to provide the funding for each small business consultant to either go buy a building, buy an office, or at least lease one. Well, why would that be helpful? It's a visible presence in the community. It's going to give them more credibility, more visibility, and it's also going to give them a place to meet with clients and referral sources. In an ideal scenario, the office that they buy or lease will have a conference room in it. Conference rooms, can be different sizes. I'd recommend at least large enough for 10 to 20 would be great. And then we could start having financial literacy workshops. So think about that. If you're a state director and you have a team of small business consultants, and each of them have true offices that will provide them the funding for, that have conference rooms and are doing financial literacy workshops, don't you think that's going to help that small business consultant be more successful, enroll more clients? Because for the more clients that the small business consultant enrolls, the more overrides that the state director makes. So this is a best case scenario, not required. Now, what we're seeing is a couple of you are not wanting to lease offices, but actually get the financing, which we can provide, to actually buy a building. If you want to buy a building that's going to be larger than just the space that you need, one thing that you may want to consider, and we can support you on, is building an incubator within your office building, whereby you can bring in new start businesses and put them in an environment where they're supported to get up and off the ground. They'll still use the same programming that you and I offer people, access to capital, the startup package program and such, but it's a great way to provide more hands-on assistance if you have the physical space. All right, continuing with being visible in the community. Another aspect that we would help fund the small business consultants, if they want, not required, is to get a business vehicle. Business vehicles, of course, are fully tax deductible, and they may even want to have it wrapped for a marketing perspective. Also, being visible in the community can very well mean whereby the small business consultant is getting involved in the fabric of the community. So maybe joining the local chamber, and not just joining, but either serving on the board, being on one of the ambassadors where they're out meeting all new businesses and so forth. So this is the first element that's a best practice for small business consultants, not required. And we can help make that happen by getting them the funding to be able to afford to do this. This is obviously beneficial to the small business consultant, because if they're more visible, they'll help more people and they'll make more money. And it's great for the state directors, because the state directors are making overrides off of the more people helped, the more money made. Make sense so far? Okay, the second element of business in a box that we can provide small business consultants, if they wish, is to have a professional office infrastructure. So what does that mean? Well, first of all is phone answering, right? Sometimes I'm horrified when I call some of our distribution partners and the way that they're they don't answer their phone, or they have some goofy message, or just it's sometimes not professional. That's not good. So what would be better is to either have a staff person answering the office phone for each small business consultant, or just simply using an answering service would be better. And so we certainly want our small business consultants to look and act professional. That's going to help them. And so in addition to being more visible, having the infrastructure is helpful. And that starts with either having a person or a service that's helping with incoming phone calls. Second thing of having a professional office infrastructure, which is best practice, not required of small business consultants, which will provide the funding to do, is to make sure that they have the technology that they need. Do they have a cell phone? Do they have an iPad to operate on the run? In their office, those of us that have dual screen monitors, it's amazing, at least for me, and I think for many of you, how much more efficient you are when you have a dual screen setup versus just always toggling. So If you're a state director, we want to do everything that we can to help these small business consultants be successful. Here we're talking about building their infrastructure, and we can provide them the funding for it. And then optionally, if they want to hire additional staff, maybe they want to hire marketers or educators or more support staff. That's up to them. Each small business consultant is the CEO of their business. They'll make their own decisions of how they want to operate their business. You know, it certainly should be $1 million a year gross income business. So it's good size. It probably will equal or exceed the size of the average Edward Jones office. But we want to make sure that they're at least aware of best practices to be visible and having infrastructure. Now, the third and final element is financial security. So again, we're talking about business in a box model, what our state directors can do to help their small business consultants be successful. We'll get each small business consultant at least $100,000, helping them become more visible, having an office infrastructure. And then here we are on point 3, financial security. What does that mean? Again, not a requirement, but we would encourage our small business consultants to be W-2 employees. Now, they can be W-2 employees of ours, and then we'll plug them into all the benefits, or they can be, their business can be paid from us, and then they can be paid by their business as a W-2 employee. Ideally, that would be a weekly direct deposit paycheck. It's up to each small business consultant what they want their take-home pay to be. Most of you, I think, are doing around $2,000 to $4,000. You might say, well, that sucks. I mean, my business is making more than that. How come I'm only getting that much out of it? Well, any of you that are familiar with tax law, as long as you're paying yourself a reasonable salary, then the excess monies distributed can be considered profit sharing, and then you don't have to pay traditional employment taxes on those, such as Medicare and Social Security. Also, for financial security, we encourage each of the small business consultants to have a good benefit package. Benefits are important because you can just imagine the cost of not having access to healthcare. And not to dwell on myself, but you all know, I think you all know, I have stage 4 cancer. My cancer treatment is $20,000 a month. $20,000 a month. Can you imagine someone trying to come up with $20,000 a month for cancer treatment if you didn't have benefits and insurance? And then we also need to make sure, and I'm speaking to you again as a state director, we want to make sure that these small business consultants are on track for a good retirement. And the last thing we want them to do is just be working for money. They should be building a retirement plan. So in summary, if you're a state director, it's up to you how you want to go build your team of small business consultants. You're smart, you're motivated, you're economically incentivized. We would encourage you to consider the business in the box model, which is to encourage you to have per zip code a small business consultant. As you bring the small business consultant on, let's plug them in to the business in the box so they have funding. And when they have funding, what can they do? They can set up their business properly so they can reach out to more small businesses, conduct more evaluations, help more people, make more money, which makes you, the state director, more money. 3 elements to the business in a box model: increase visibility, having a good infrastructure, and then making sure that these small business consultants have financial security. So let us know what questions you have on that. What are the action steps if you're a state director? So again, anyone that's on the training is welcome. We're very transparent. This training is really oriented towards those of you that are state directors. So if you're a state director, what do we need to do? We need to start adding consultants to your team. A state director with no consultants is a zombie director. It's not going to work, right? You're not going to make any money. You're not going to help anyone. That's a waste. So either as a state director, either be laser focused on adding consultants, or probably you should resign because you're in the wrong role. That's the focus of state directors, is to go build a team so we can help small businesses and you can make a shitload of money. So how do we do that? Let's make sure that we get down to the practical aspects. How do we do that? Well, we've provided each state director a replicated website. Looks just like guaranteedfunding.org. Give them your link, give the prospects your link, have them go to the career page. They fill out the little form. We'll send them the Adobe packet and they'll enroll and they'll be plugged in. Bam. Now you've got a consultant. And we should repeat that frequently, right? If you want to take an organized approach, try to get a consultant in each zip code. Do you have to have a consultant in each zip code? No. You can do it however you want. Again, you're smart, you're motivated, you're running your state, right? I'm not going to tell the director of Florida how to run Florida, or the director of Texas or California how to do their job. You're in charge of your state. This is just a best practice to consider. All right, so once we add a consultant, then I encourage you to have encourage them to complete the onboarding training. We send onboarding training to every new small business consultant. We in fact send an email with onboarding training, and we also send them an Adobe with onboarding training. You should have gone through that as well if you're a state director. If not, we need to fix that, but you should have. So you don't have to do the training. It's available on demand. But if you're going to build a team, the first thing you'd probably want to do is make sure that they're aware of the importance of going through that training. But they're going to be open for business immediately, so they can start making money right away. We're not going to drag our feet. On an ongoing basis, but especially initially, we would recommend that you schedule a goal-setting call with them. You need to figure out what it is that they're wanting to accomplish, because it makes all the difference in the world. Let's say you have a state director like Jimmy Howard's on. So Jimmy's a go-getter. Jimmy is wanting, if I recall correctly, to help as a small business consultant. Jimmy wants to help one person a day. He wants to make us $30,000 a month, which is our normal goal for our small business consultants. Well, great. So we need to support Jimmy in earning $30,000 a month. And if he does that, then you as the state director, you're making about $7,000 in override. Not bad, right? Jimmy's doing well, you're doing well, and we want a whole bunch of Jimmys. But what if not everyone's a Jimmy, right? Some people are going to come to you and say, well, I want to be a small business consultant, but I don't want to put that much effort in. I just want to make $2,000 a week, want to help 2 people a week, $8,000 a month. Well, that's fine, right? So we can work with part-time workers or full-time workers, go-getters, or those that are less aggressive. But the goal-setting call allows you to figure out what they're wanting to accomplish. We will provide the leads. We will provide the leads. If you're a state director and you need prospects, leads for consultants, I've got them for you. If you are a consultant and you need leads of prospective clients, I've got warm leads for you, right? So we've got free leads, no strings attached. You don't have to pay for them, doesn't reduce your income. We have more leads than we can handle. That's one of the reasons we built this distribution system. So some people will come up with excuses. An excuse that they can't come up with is, I don't have any leads. And it also shouldn't be, I can't do this, because it's not very complicated. So point is, set up a goal-setting call with them, make sure they've gone through the onboarding training, and then they need to know the process. If I were you, if I were you as a state director, I would walk every one of your consultants through the process. So even though we train on it, it's better to also do it rather than just hear about it. So if you're a state director, let's say that I'm a state director and I just brought on, we'll say Pia. And so I'd say, Pia, great, welcome aboard. We're excited that you're going to be one of our small business consultants. I want to make sure that you receive the onboarding information, one email and one Adobe. Pia, have you received those, and have you gone through those? And a lot of times people will say, oh, I've received it, but I've skimmed it or I haven't gone through it. Well, you want to apply a little gentle pressure. Well, Pia, it's really important that you know what you're doing, so you have the confidence and competence to help people. It's not fair to the small businesses that you're doing evaluations on if you don't know what you're doing. So you want the consultant to first go through the onboarding training, then you want to walk them through it themselves. So I'd say, well, great, Pia, now let's take you through it directly. And so Pia, by you going through it, you'll be able to receive the same benefits. We can get you at least 100,000 to have your business in the box if you want. You don't have to, but if you want. So Pia, what we'd love to do is help you be visible in your community, have a professional office infrastructure, and make sure you have financial security. So this is answering the question that Sonia has of, well, how do you make this happen? Well, this is it, right? So you add a consultant, you have them go through the training, and then you walk them through the process. Well, what does that mean? Well, we've trained on it, right? You're going to take each person through each new consultant through the 6-question funding checklist. And then one of two things is going to happen. Either they're qualified for funding or not. If they're qualified for funding, we go directly to access to capital. If they're not qualified for funding yet, based upon their answers to the 6 questions, then we'll do two things. We'll plug them into the startup funding program and we'll enroll them in the access to capital. And then they're going to have the capital they need to build their infrastructure if they want. And they don't have to. I would not make this a requirement. On an ongoing basis, in summary, the state director should be a visible leader to continue to support them. Okay, so one of the questions we have, and it fits nicely to where I was going to go with this, is can we set up a similar model for the state directors? Absolutely. Now, as a state director, your world's a little bit different, right? Because as a state director, you're probably more focused on developing and managing your team of consultants than doing the consultant work yourself. So what's going to be really important for the state director, I would think, is having a company business vehicle, because you'll probably want to get out. You'll want to be visible in these communities across the state, interfacing with your consultants. But yes, we could do the same process for our state directors as our consultants. So at the end, where does the money come from? The money comes through the Access to Capital program, right? That's what we do. That's what you and I do to help people. We're just talking about how this specifically can be packaged as business in the box to help a certain group of people, small business consultants. And by helping them, they'll make more money. And you as a state director will make more overrides. So let's make sure we're clear on those action steps. All right, so I've ran a little bit long. Let's see what questions you have before we wrap it up. Okay, so Sonia's question was about where does the money come from, and it comes through access to capital. And if they need the startup funding. So I think she asked a question before I got to this point. So there's no different source of funding. It's the programming that you and I help small businesses with. I'm just trying to bring to your attention that we can help small business consultants use the programming so they can be more credible, more visible, more credible, have more financial security. Okay, thank you for that one. Pia was asking, can this be used for state directors as well? And that's what I just answered. So absolutely. And then, yes, anyone that is needing free leads, email us. We had a training on that. I think it was yesterday. Time goes by quickly. There's no cost for the free leads. There's no strings attached, but email us. We'll send you the Adobe to get plugged into that. And we have really, really good leads. So with that, if you have other questions, email us. You can call us or text us. I'd recommend emailing. We should be scheduling weekly calls. Each week, we should have a call, planning, goal setting, accountability call. So make sure that you're doing that. We've talked about that on prior trainings. If there's anything else you can think of that we can help you with, let us know, but we'll see you back tomorrow. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.